Hello and welcome to today's Exercise Etc. webinar. My name is Mike Diebler and today we're going to be talking about beyond cardio, sweat equity, and weight management. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about myself and who you're going to be listening to over the next couple of hours. Like I said, my name is Mike Diebler. A little bit about my background. I was a former All-American track and field athlete at the University of Connecticut. That's kind of where I got into exercise and performance and looking for every advantage possible to make myself better. At the same time, I got my bachelor's degree in kinesiology. From there, I want to continue my learning and went to the University of Florida where I got my master's degree in exercise and sports science. And that's really where I started to get hands-on and working more with individuals and clients and getting into the training profession. From there, got a number of different certifications, certified strength and conditioning specialist, among many other certifications out there. I currently have a few different roles. I am the owner of a private personal training studio in San Diego, California called San Diego Premier Training. On top of that, I am the director of education with Exercise Etc. So I do a lot of our webinars and live workshops, as well as put together a lot of the course content that you may see throughout these programs. And I also teach at a community college out here. I teach exercise physiology at Miramar College. And if I wasn't busy enough, on top of that, I do a lot of other consulting work with other organizations out there. So my background is in a lot of different areas, from being an athlete to a coach and trainer, business owner, educator. So I hope that my experience and knowledge is going to be very valuable for you to learn quite a few things as we go through today's webinar. Now, you are listening to the webinar and you're going to be getting not only some great information, but also your continuing ed credits for your different organizations that you may be certified through. As you can see, we have some great partnerships with a lot of different organizations there, so you'll be able to get credit for this webinar for many of the organizations that you are certified through. Now, how you're going to get those credits in case you haven't taken a webinar with us. So first, you are going to hang out with me for a little while and watch this entire webinar. Once you are finished, you will be able to log into our website at www.exerciseetc.com. Once there, at the top right hand side of the screen, you're going to click on the administration tab, and then from there click on the webinar on demand certificates. Then you're going to choose the exact title of this webinar, which is Beyond Cardio, Sweat Equity, and Weight Management Webinar. Just keep in mind some webinars do have very similar titles, so you might see cardio or weight management in another title. Just make sure it's this exact title so you are getting the correct credits for this webinar. And you can always check your receipt in case you forget. Once you select the correct webinar, which is going to be important because we are going to have a 20-question quiz that will be required, so we want to make sure that you're taking the right quiz. Once you get through the quiz, there'll be a brief evaluation. You fill in any other required fields, and then you can click Get Certificate, and then your certificate's going to be emailed to you instantly, so you can print it or save it for your records. Now, with the quiz, the webinar quiz is going to be based on the printed material, so you should have received a handout that goes along with this lecture. So as long as you're following along on the handout, the quiz sequentially follows that outline, not necessarily how I present the material. So just make sure you have your handout with you, and it'll make that quiz go a lot smoother. Okay, so we're going to be talking about weight management, which obviously is a very critical topic. Many of us are working with those trying to improve body composition, get healthier, move better, and we can see just based off of the numbers, we have a losing battle, right? We're seeing more and more obesity, more and more problems due to obesity come up, and unfortunately, we're seeing younger and younger people suffer from this. So we have a lot of work to do, and obviously we're still learning. We're still trying to find the best way that we can help people. And there's a lot of things we do know, and of course there's a lot of things we don't know, but we do have a good idea of what works. It's just passing on that information to our clients so they actually apply it and stick with it for the long term. And that's obviously what our struggle is often. We have a lot of things out there that catch people's attention for the quick fix, the easy fix. And we know how that's going to play out, right? We know that, sure, you'll get results from just about anything. And if you do something dramatic, you'll probably get initially some pretty dramatic results. But does that really matter if you can't maintain it, right? And that's the big problem that we run into is anybody can lose weight. I can show you a million different ways that you can lose fat and probably lose muscle with it and other things, but that you'll see that scale number go down, which unfortunately that's what so many people base their success off of. So as we go through this webinar, we're going to be focusing on two key areas of nutrition and exercise. And I don't think we can have this conversation without both of those. And we'll get more into that. So what causes obesity? Now, clearly, there is no easy answer. We're going to see some oversimplified statements here. And obviously, there's truth to these things, but it's way more complex than many people want to make it out to. So we see a quote here from David Kessler, who wrote The End of Overeating in 2009. So people who are fat simply eat more than people who are lean. So again, there's obviously truth to that, but there is a lot more that'll go into it than that. Or from the World Health Organization in 2012, people are not fat because they exercise too little, they're fat because they eat too much. So again, we're going to talk more and more about those two sides of the equation here. But things we definitely know, right? Obesity is a problem. It is being categorized as a disease now as of 2013. So for quite some time now, obesity is considered a disease. And really the big thing with obesity, now we'll see some people who suffer from obesity and they're generally healthy. They don't have many other issues. Their blood lipid profiles are okay. They don't have any other diseases, and that's going to happen. We'll have people. It's like that person that maybe smoked their whole life and never had any lung issues. That's just how it is sometimes. But what we absolutely know is those that suffer from obesity, their risk for just about every disease out there goes up, and early mortality, all of these bad things that really nobody really should want to suffer from, your risk of getting those things goes up, right? Diabetes, heart disease, the list goes on and on. So that's really what we're trying to explain to people, that this is the first sign, right? You might not have any other issues, but your body is screaming that there is a problem, and if we don't address it now, something's going to happen. Something's going to break down the road. So that's why this is such an important thing. It's obesity leading to all of these other problems that we might see. Many of those problems, like I said, are physical and physiological problems, but there's also the psychological side of it. So we see this very big connection between an increased BMI and risk of major depressive symptoms. So these often go hand in hand, and it's a vicious cycle of needing to eat more to satisfy some of these things that they're just missing in their life. So now, obviously, this is going outside of the scope of a lot of what we are trained to do, but it's just something that we need to be aware of, right? So that might be having a network of people that they know this, hey, it's not just about diet and exercise. Obviously, those are big pieces of it, but if we don't really understand the underlying causes to some of these things, we're going to be limited with how we can help. So just keep that in mind, because I know it can be frustrating sometimes when we're explaining to clients, right? You can't eat fast food every day. Why do you keep doing it? It's not as simple as saying just stop doing that, because for some people there might be bigger issues. And making sure we're aware too, if they are suffering from obesity and then having depressive symptoms as well, and they're seeing their doctors. Are they being prescribed antidepressants, which side effect is often weight gain, which leads to more depression? So we have problems going that way. And one thing we do know is that exercise can be just as effective as antidepressants, which is pretty amazing. So if we can get them to buy into at least exercising, at least moving more, regardless if you're losing weight, that's going to be a huge first step. So I know people want to see the scale move, but there is a great deal of benefit with simply just exercising and forgetting about everything else for now, right? So we have to take that first step in getting them moving, feeling better about themselves, and we can see a lot of positive things coming from that, even if we don't see a single pound drop on the scale. So this is just important because we want to make sure our clients understand that fact, that you can't let weight determine your success, because it's one thing and it might not even be a good measurement of how successful you're being. Okay, so what we still know, so some things we know, the underlying philosophies of how do you manage your weight. So we have to look at calories in versus calories out. That is going to be our underlying principle that we follow, right? If you eat less than you expend, you'll lose weight. If you eat the same as you expend, you'll maintain weight. And if you eat more than you expend, you'll gain weight, right? So we understand that concept, and it should be the foundation of all successful weight management programs. If you look at all of the different diets out there, they all are based off of that. So a lot of diets, as different as they may seem, are all based off of this principle, right? They're just trying to get you into a caloric deficit in some way. And it might be doing it by eliminating a certain food type, only eating at certain times, whatever it might be. That's the magic formula, if we can do that, versus, oh, it's just because you're eating vegetarian or keto or intermittent fasting, right? All of those different diets have their place, and we'll talk and touch on some of them. But really, that's the main thing that's driving this weight management. The problem is that we don't necessarily know what these numbers are. I mean, we don't know what the numbers are. Do you really know how many calories you're taking in? Do you know how many calories you're expending? We don't. We're just trying to get in the ballpark, really, but we're never really going to know exactly how many calories we eat, how many calories we expend. Now, I know with technology and certain things, we're getting better ideas, but still, if you've ever taken a food log or done a food log, and I'm sure you have at some point, how accurate really are you being? Are you measuring all your food? Did you choose the exact type of food, or did you just pick the one that was closest to what you thought you were eating? There's a lot of variance, and even if we got it exactly right, are those labels really 100% accurate? And there's so many different things that can play into it. And versus calories out, same idea. Do we really know how many calories I'm expending in every workout? Now, despite that, that's the biggest thing that we have to focus on. And clients know that. Most people understand if you eat too much, you're just going to gain weight. If you sit on the couch all day, you're going to gain weight. So we have to keep this in mind as well, that it's not just the knowledge of how to do these things, or what they should be doing, I should say. It's really in how do I implement these things. And this is where it gets hard. So to change your behavior is a very, very difficult thing to do. And if you've ever tried to quit anything in your life, you know that, right? People know smoking is bad for them, yet they do it for years and years and years, because it is just part of who they are. It's just what they do. And to take that away is a hard thing to live with, right? So they're going to take on some of the negative aspects of it because it's a part of them. So we need to understand that it's not as simple as, hey, I'm going to tell you to eat more vegetables and work out more, right? I get it, like that would work if you did it, but are you actually going to do it? So a couple good resources that you may want to look into, because we're not going to talk this workshop a ton about behavior change, but I want to at least bring it up to know that all the things we're going to talk about, we have to find a way to help them implement them, not just tell them what to do. And two books that could be helpful. Motivational Interviewing is a great book. It's a great concept. It's basically trying to ask questions to get an individual to basically come to the conclusion you're trying to get to them on their own. I usually explain it, if you've ever seen the movie in Inception, right, where they're trying to go into a dream to get that person to make a decision that they need them to make. So it's kind of like that, where we're going to probe them with very specific questioning to get them to come to a specific conclusion. Because nobody likes to be told what to do. I can tell you exactly what you should eat and the things you should be doing, but it's not as successful when I help you come to your own conclusion, right? I can tell you, hey, you need to stop drinking wine every night. You need to stop with the dessert. You need to exercise every day, all these different things, versus me saying, well, are you happy with the situation you're in right now? If you're not, what are some things you think you need to either start doing or stop doing, and basically help them. And if they're like, I really don't know, we can start giving them, we're their coach, we're going to help them. But a lot of times they know, right? They know, well, if I didn't drink wine every night, I'd probably see more progress. Then it's okay, let's go to the next step. What are some things you think we can do to maybe drink less wine or whatever it might be? So that's motivational interviewing, which is a very powerful tool once you understand it. The other book is this picture that we see here. This is from Switch, and it uses the analogy of the rider on the elephant going down the path. And this means the rider represents our rational brain, the elephant represents our emotional brain, and then the path represents our environment. And if I'm trying to get somebody to switch a behavior, start a new habit or stop an old one, whatever it might be, I need to address all of these different areas. And if I can do that, I'm going to be much more successful. And I love how they use this analogy, because we see the emotional side is that elephant. So if that elephant really wanted to toss that rider around, it could do whatever it wanted to, right? There's no way that rider could control an out of control elephant. So we can talk to that rider all we want and explain the rational reason they should be doing something, but if the emotional side takes over, the rider has very little influence, right? I keep using the smoking example. Smoking's bad for you. That's a very rational concept to understand, but the emotional side of it, my friends smoke, I feel good, it's part of who I am. All of those emotional things are going to override the rational side. Same thing with eating. I get it that eating these foods are going to cause me to gain weight and not be as healthy for me, but I feel good. They satisfy something for me, right? So, emotional eating, there's a reason we call it that, because it's not a physiological need that we're trying to satisfy, it's an emotional need. So we need to address both. Yes, you want to talk to the rider. I want to explain the rational reasoning behind why we're doing something, but if you're neglecting the emotional side to motivate them to make that change, it's going to be a lot harder for them to actually do something. And then finally, shaping the path is making the path as clear as possible. You want to make the easiest decision the best decision, right? So there's always cut up vegetables and snacks available in the refrigerator, so they don't really have to think about it, right? We try not to hang out with people who are bad influences on us, that are always, drinking and eating bad food or whatever it might be. If I only hang out with people that are health conscious and exercise, I'm more likely to do those things. So that's the third piece, is making sure we address that environment. So we bring all this up basically because behavior change is the key to long-term success. So with all the stuff we're going to be talking about throughout this webinar, with exercise, with nutrition, just keep this in mind, that all of this great information, if it doesn't stick, it's not going to help. So don't get frustrated. Just find different ways that you can help your client make these changes in order to get the most success out of the programs you're going to offer them. So the bottom line is we need to understand how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I always like this analogy because we always hear the argument and the debating over what's more important, nutrition or exercise for weight loss or weight management, whatever we're looking at. And I don't think you can honestly answer that question with one or the other. And meaning, if I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I need three ingredients. I need bread, I need peanut butter, I need jelly. If I can't have all those things, I don't have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it's the same thing. If we're looking for helping our clients maintain or implement a healthy lifestyle, nutrition is not more important than exercise, and exercise is not more important than nutrition because they do totally different things. So I don't understand how we can compare these two as one being more important than the other because they're just different, right? So they do different things. Nutrition will do things that exercise cannot do, and exercise will do things that nutrition can't do. So let's not debate about which is more important. We need to talk more about how do I implement these two things. So one, I need healthy nutritional habits to control overeating and implement a plan to get good quality nutrition in their regular routine. And I needed a strategic exercise program to increase energy expenditure and improve lean body muscle mass and things like that. So let's focus on those things, not which this or that. It's you can't have what we're trying to get without both. So let's start out by looking at some nutrition. So why do we overeat? I think really if we just skip right to that last point, it's going to be a combination of physiology and psychology. As I mentioned before, some of this we're not qualified to handle, but again, we just need to be aware that there is that psychological component. You have a rough day, you go right to the wine, you go right to the sweets, whatever it might be, those comfort foods to make you feel better. You can't rationalize it all the time, like we talked about, so just be aware of that. But there's physiological reasons as well. We're hardwired to eat. Remember, our sole purpose of our DNA is trying to get us to survive and reproduce. Right? That's what we're deep down what we're coded to do. And if you don't eat enough or you run out of food, that will not happen. If you see somebody who is malnourished, reproductive systems start to shut down because the body knows that it has to start cutting things out that could jeopardize the whole system. So it starts getting rid of things in order to just survive. So we will eat and store fat for future need. And obviously if we just continue to eat, this becomes a problem, but it's kind of built into our DNA that hey, if food's available, eat it, store it. We can use it later because we don't want to starve because we can't live without this nutrition. Now, salt and sugar and fat in particular, they taste good. They're going to be pleasing. They're going to set off different neurotransmitters like dopamine that make us feel good. And now it's going to be something that we continually want to get and satisfy there. Traditionally, some of those things were hard to come by, not so much anymore. Now it's harder to not get those things with your food. So, but like I said, it's that combination of that physiological causes with psychological causes. So we need to address both of them. Now, I've already started to mention, we're talking about energy balance, calories in versus calories out. And I mentioned it, this is a very flawed formula. Now, the principle is true. It's more trying to turn this idea of energy balance into a math problem. And that's where we're getting into trouble. And we can start off by talking about the 3,500 calorie per pound rule. That basically this is not that accurate, and it's going to depend on so many different things, and it's an overgeneralization. It made a complex thing easy, so it's stuck. But it's been refuted a few times, and we see some sources here that it just doesn't hold up to what we thought it was. So we can take an example here, an inactive 35-year-old, 200-pound man who cut 500 calories per day from diet would, typically lose 23 pounds per year. That would be almost 8,000 calories per pound of fat. So 3,500 is going to be a very average number, generalization. It may be accurate for some, but it's not going to be accurate for others. And now where we get into trouble is when our clients download a food diary app and they enter in their information, and it's going to tell them they should eat this many calories, and if you cut your calories by this much, you will lose X amount of weight by, in the next 30 days, whatever it is. And then what happens when they get 30 days in and they have not hit that goal? They get frustrated, right? Because, hey, my app told me I would lose 5 pounds if I did what it said, and I did. But we see this happen all the time because the numbers are just off, right? Well, one, it could be user error. They're not entering the right information in. They're really not eating what they thought they ate. But even if they were, we don't know that 3,500 calories is going to be a pound of fat for that person. So I think food diaries are very useful and should be used in the right situation. Where I think we get in trouble, though, is like I said, relying on these numbers to predict fat loss or weight loss or gain, whatever it might be, because we really can't simplify these numbers as much as people would like to. Obviously, we've seen this 3,500 calorie rule come up all over the place in several thousand books and blogs and texts and other things. Where it came from, it originated from a researcher in the 1950s who calculated that a pound of fat stored approximately 3,500 calories, but just it's not as easy to say that in what actually happens. So like I said, it made a complex metabolic calculation seem simple, and it stuck. Okay, so here's an example from the National Institute for Clinical Excellence in 2006. So a group of people reduced their caloric intake by 600 calories per day for 1 year. So if we plug that into a formula, we have 600 calories times 365 days. That would give us 219,000. If we divide that by 3,500 calories, we would get 62 pounds. When we look at what actually happened, the lowest weight loss we saw was 0.8 pounds, and the highest was 17 pounds. So now, obviously, somebody trying to stick to a caloric deficit for 365 days in a row is probably a little unrealistic. But even if they kind of stuck to it, you would expect would see much better numbers than simply 17 pounds. So again, we're trying to make something very complex like the human body and metabolism and turn it into a simple math problem. And it's just not something that we are able to do. So I know I keep repeating myself, but energy balance is important. Just trying to figure out those numbers, you might go crazy and your clients are going to get very frustrated. And remember, our ultimate goal is getting our clients to actually stick with something that we recommend. So we have to keep that in mind, right? If you eat too much, no matter what you're eating, you're probably not going to see the results that you're looking for. So food logs come in handy because it at least puts us in the ballpark. If you take a food log and it comes out to 5,000 calories, and we're trying to lose weight and you weigh 150 pounds, that's probably significantly over what you should be doing. So at least create some awareness. Just remind your clients not to really pay too much attention to some of the numbers they see there. Now, what type of diet? So that's one part is just calories, right? So that's part of it. But we hear a calorie is a calorie. But really, the type of food you're eating is going to make a big difference from, look at all the nutrients that are in certain types of food, right? If we look at 100 calories of strawberries versus 100 calories of Skittles, they're 100 calories each. So they're equal, right? But clearly they're not, because one's going to be nutrient dense. It's going to have lots of different nutrients inside of it and the other isn't. So all of that does make a difference. It's not as simple as a calorie is a calorie. So what type of food should we recommend? This is where it gets very, very difficult because you probably have your own opinions, things you like, your own biases. Maybe something worked for you. This is hard. Try not to fall into that trap of, I think this is a good diet, or I believe this is a bad diet, or whatever it might be, because people respond differently and they will thrive differently on different types of diets. So a lot of the diets we're going to talk about are going to be great for some people and not great for others. But what I don't want you to walk away is thinking that you have to follow a specific type of diet, right? You have to be vegetarian because a lot of people do well on vegetarian. A lot of people don't do well on vegetarian, and a lot of people do very well on an animal-based diet. So it really all depends. We'll look at some research, but studying nutrition is a very difficult subject. So we can't rely solely on just science and research. This is something we have to, be practical about. Pay attention to anecdotal evidence that it works really well for some people, not others. We're just simply providing information for our clients to find the best thing that they realistically can do. If you can go the rest of your life and never eat another animal product and you're totally fine with that, or you have specific beliefs that you don't think we should be eating meat, then yeah, plant-based is probably the way to go. But if you just watched a documentary and think that anything other than a plant-based diet is bad, right? That's just bad information. So let's start with plant-based nutrition. Now, this is a very broad term, and I do like plant-based nutrition versus, well, I shouldn't say I like. We need to define what is a plant-based diet, because plant-based and vegetarian are not the same thing, and plant-based and vegan are not the same thing. So we want to make sure we understand what exactly that means. And now when you look at specific research studies, we need to know, well, what did they mean by plant-based? And they'll usually explain exactly what type of diet that they followed. So I'm saying plant-based because this is a very broad term, right? Plant-based could include animal products. It's based with plants. That doesn't mean it's solely plants. So you can still eat animal products, but the foundation of your diet is going to be more plants. And obviously there's more extremes. It could be vegetarian, it could be vegan, right? And we can eliminate all animal products, but doesn't necessarily have to be. So just keep that in mind when you're looking up these different types of plant-based diets. What exactly do they mean by plant-based? This first study here, so found athletes eating a plant-based diet showed no difference in aerobic, anaerobic, or strength capacity. So they looked at athletes. I know not all of us are working with athletes, but we commonly hear this with athletes that either removing animal products will make them weaker or slower, or vice versa, that going vegetarian will make them superior. But what this study, and which a lot of studies show, is there really is no significant difference whether you're plant-based or animal-based. So for athletes, they both can be beneficial. So there's plenty of athletes that are thriving on plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, and there's athletes thriving on animal-based. So again, just depends. The second one found no improvement or decline in performance when switching to a plant-based diet. So in this study, the first study, they looked at people who were already vegetarian and already animal eaters. And then the second study, they switched from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet, and they wanted to see, did you get better or worse? And they found that there was no difference in some of these performance outcomes. So again, maybe it doesn't matter as much as we think it does. And one important concept to definitely bring up is sometimes we hear plant-based and we automatically assume that that means healthy, right? It could be, but it absolutely might be not nutritious food, right? When we look at trying to get people to cross over into a plant-based diet and, kind of tempting, I don't know if that's the right word, but, having these impossible foods, meat light product, meat substitutes, which could be totally fine, but a lot of them are very heavy in chemicals and non-food products and artificial foods and things like that. So keep that in mind. Is that better than having a hamburger or something like that? So we have to pay attention to what is going in to some of these foods. And then things like, desserts are still desserts, whether they're vegan, vegetarian. These could be very high in sugar, high in fat. It could be totally fine, but again, sometimes we think, oh, these are, vegetarian, whatever, or gluten-free, or whatever it might be. A gluten-free cookie is still going to have its calories and sugar and things like that. So I know that's not necessarily plant-based, but hopefully you get the idea that still it's potentially lots of carbohydrates if you're switching to a plant-based diet, if you're not familiar with how to get different food sources in there. So again, hopefully I'm doing my best to be as impartial as possible, because that's what I think you should be able to do as well, is know, is this a good fit or not? And it's not, hey, I think everybody should eat this way because it worked for me. Another popular trend we're seeing is intermittent fasting. So first of all, we all do this every day already, right? We fast every single day unless you're waking up in the middle of the night and snacking. We have to define what is a fast, because if I go 10 minutes without eating, is that a fast? Probably not. Probably we're looking at several hours. But most of us, hopefully, we're sleeping 8 hours a night, so we're fasting for 8 hours, and then we break our fast with breakfast, whenever that is. So what most people are referring to with intermittent fasting is just extending this fast a little bit longer, skipping breakfast and eating our first meal later on in the day. So it's interesting that forever we were told, breakfast is the most important meal. You need to be eating breakfast, eating more often. It's boosting your metabolism, and we thought we knew all this stuff, but now people are saying the complete opposite, right? Where we shouldn't eat breakfast and eat fewer times per day. But again, the thing is, both work, right? You can look at those that eat breakfast, those that don't eat breakfast, those that do intermittent fasting, some lose weight, some don't. Those that don't intermittent fast, some lose weight, some don't. So again, it's just looking at, do certain people do well with this type of diet? One kind of example I always like to share, there's a research study that they wanted to kind of test this idea of eating breakfast. Is it crucial for weight loss or not? And they compared, they took a group of people, or two groups of people, those that eat breakfast regularly and those that don't eat breakfast regularly. And then within each of those groups, they cut them in half, and half continued what they were doing. So the non-breakfast eaters continued to skip breakfast, and the breakfast eaters continued to eat breakfast. And then the other half of those groups switched. And so the breakfast skippers started eating breakfast, and the breakfast eaters started not to eat breakfast. And they wanted to compare, I don't remember how long the study was for, over several weeks, who lost the most weight when they did that, when everything else being equal. And they found those that lost the most weight were the two groups that changed. So the ones that stopped eating breakfast and the ones that started eating breakfast. And their conclusion was basically that it was because they became the most aware of a nutrition change, and they were being more conscious about what they were eating. So again, does it matter? We'll see. There is growing evidence that support the benefits of intermittent fasting, not just for weight management, for other things. We definitely seen a lot of fasting research done on animals that have shown to be very positive. Human studies are still young, still learning more and more. But some things we have found are things like decreased LDL and triglyceride levels, reduced markers of inflammation, decreased oxidative stress, increase cellular turnover and repair, improve appetite control, improve blood glucose and insulin control, and things like that. So some of these will aid with weight management. Others are just good markers of health. I do think there's something about, especially the last couple things like appetite control and blood sugar levels, that do look pretty promising, at least with intermittent fasting. Some people have become so reliant on food regularly that their body has become impaired to regulate on its own. And we see a lot of this blood glucose and insulin imbalances. you don't need to eat every day, right? You will definitely survive and be fine if you didn't eat for 24 hours. I'm not telling you to go do that, but you would be totally fine, in if you did it and you felt terrible, maybe headache, starving, all of these different things, I think that's a sign that your body is just not very well prepared to do what it's supposed to do, right? Our bodies should be pretty remarkable at adapting to whatever situation they're in. But if you're constantly eating carbohydrates and sugar, your body becomes very reliant on that. Now, if you stop eating that sugar, your body should be able to switch right over to all the fat stores in your body. We all have fat stores, some more than others, but they're all there. So why is it that just because I don't eat, I don't just switch over and use some of the stored energy all over my body? Well, it's because we've become so used to constantly eating foods, especially carbohydrates. So now it's really difficult for our body to switch over to that fat utilization. So if you were to fast for 24 hours, which again shouldn't be a big deal, but if you did it and were miserable, it's a sign that maybe you do need to pay attention to the types of food you're eating and how often you're eating, because your body's become so reliant on constant sugar intake. Okay, so how to fast? You just don't eat, right? It's that simple. So there are a few different techniques. So like I said, you can do a 24-hour fast. Many, millions of people around the world do this for religious reasons. Every year they won't eat for extended periods of time. But like I said, it is a good little challenge to just test to see how you do. Can you make it 24 hours without eating? And obviously water is still okay, and you should be drinking water, but just no food, no calories, and just see how you respond to it. So just kind of to check in and see how you do. If you're not ready for something that drastic, we can do daily fast, and we just, like I said, we extend our nightly fast. We'll see like a 16-8 window or a 24 window, meaning we'll fast for 16 hours, eat for 8, or fast for 20 hours, eat for 4. Again, both show promise. One might feel better versus the other. I don't know that we can say one being better than the other, but it's just different ways you can try doing intermittent fasting. And then again, you're not eating for 4 hours straight or 8 hours straight. It's just you have a window of time that you will consume all of your meals. Now remember, overeating is overeating. So if you fast for 20 hours and then eat 10,000 calories in your 4-hour window, you're probably going to gain some weight. So we still have to pay attention to the nutrients we're eating and things like that. Like I said, during the fast, water will be fine. Some people are afraid that they're going to lose lean muscle tissue. Probably not the case, but if they're really worried about it, you can take essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids to help maintain some of that lean tissue. If you're going to work out, you do want to keep in mind how you should do that. So work out at the end of the fast, and then you can do your feeding right after. At least if it's a high intensity effort. If you're doing more low intensity effort, that's probably not a big deal to work out in the middle of your fast, because it's not expending as much energy. So just kind of depends on the type of workout you'll be doing. Okay, next we're looking at Mediterranean diet or anti-inflammatory diet. So there's growing evidence about the Mediterranean diet, looking at things from increasing longevity, longer lifespan, reduced risk of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, decreased risk of coronary artery disease, diabetes, cancers, other metabolic issues. And I think the interesting with the Mediterranean diet and many of the anti-inflammatory diets is the increase in fat that we're finding in these diets. Good sources of fat, but some people really struggle because they were told for so long of all the negative things with fat. And we, obviously remember, not all fats are created equal. So it's not just that fats are bad. It's, certain sources of too much fat are bad. Obviously too much of anything is a bad thing, but we need fats, we need carbohydrates, we need proteins. We just need them in the right amounts. And I think The good thing when we're looking at the Mediterranean diet is showing people that no, fats are good. We're going to get lots of healthy fats in your diet. Things like avocados, fish, sardines, salmon, olive oil. We want to make sure we're increasing those types of food. We want to make sure we're eating plenty. This is primarily a plant-based diet. There is going to be meat sources in there. We talked about fish, but looking at lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of variety, eating the rainbow. For any kind of diet, that would be an important concept to grasp, is that there's a reason fruits and vegetables are all these different colors, and we don't want to just eat green fruits and vegetables, and we don't want to just eat blue. We want all the different colors because they provide different things for our body. And again, looking at natural, unprocessed food as much as possible. We're going to try and avoid sugary foods, sodas, desserts. Meat is okay, but staying away from highly processed meats or prepared foods and deli meats and things like that. We're going to watch out for, again, carbs are okay. Grains are going to be in the diet, but looking out for refined carbs and certain oils, soybean, corn, things like that. So I know we just covered a couple, and there's a lot more nutrition styles that you can follow, but really just, again, focusing on what do all these diets have that all these successful diets have in common. And again, they tend to have more in common than they don't. But what's the best plan for yourself or your clients? We have that standard answer. It depends. I can't give you a one-size-fits-all diet plan because one size doesn't fit all. You might do well with this, you might not. Sure, you might not know, and it's okay for a little bit of trial and error, and just let your clients know, be honest with them that there are a lot of different ways we can eat healthy. We just need to find the best way for you to eat healthy that will help you, keep your sanity, don't feel like you're depriving yourself, and allow you to do all the things you want to do, hang out with friends and go to parties and all these different things. So whatever you decide with your client, we just want to make sure, one, are we increasing nutrient diversity and density? Lots of different types of food, whole foods, natural foods when possible, but just getting that diversity in there, eating the rainbow. Not caloric dense, but nutrient dense. If they're trying to lose weight, we have to result in a caloric deficit. And some of these different diets will help with that. Some people, when they do intermittent fasting, it wasn't anything magical about the intermittent fasting. It was the fact that when they shortened their eating window, they just tended to eat less. When they followed those specific rules, it helped them maintain that caloric deficit, which was great. So if that is what does it for them, then let's do more of that. And really, we need to be realistic, and maintainable. So remember, there's no on or off a diet. It's just you're doing what you need to do to support your body. Sometimes you may tighten it up and be a little stricter, but that's what we need to consider, right? So again, try and be impartial. Try not to push all of your eating habits onto them. One of the biggest things I like to do with clients is really, I like that idea of a food log, mainly because I just want to see what do you normally do, because I don't feel good about giving you any nutritional advice or recommendations until I know what you're doing. If you eat McDonald's 5 days a week, my advice is going to be, very specific to that versus you just eat a little bit too much carbohydrates or something like that. So we might see this end goal of where we want to get people to with their nutrition, but we have to understand there's probably many steps to get there, and people start on different steps. So you need to figure out what the most appropriate step for that person is. Okay, well, now let's move on to the other side of the equation. So we've talked about calories in, now looking at calories out for weight management. And obviously there's a number of different things that are going to play a role for weight management. And we can't really, we want to include all of them. And we're going to primarily focus on exercise and a specific style of training that we want to make sure we incorporate. But all the different styles of exercise will play a role in certain situations. Just think with nutrition, certain diet plans or nutrition programs are going to be more applicable to certain people. Same thing goes for exercise. So we don't want to let our own personal beliefs get in the way too much. You might have a specific style that you enjoy. It may work really well for some people, but not for everyone. Some people get more drawn to um, less structured exercise, walking, hiking, um, whatever it might be there. Others like more of the structured interval training and strength training or Zumba or whatever it might be. So there's a number of different directions to go. So we do want to remember, though, on this energy expenditure side of the equation, exercise is one piece. Now, if we look up or look at the total energy expenditure that's going to occur throughout the day, we have, or activity thermogenesis as it's known, we have both exercise activity thermogenesis and non-exercise activity thermogenesis, also known as EAT and NEAT. Now, we're primarily going to focus on the EAT portion, the exercise activity thermogenesis. This is, again, planned exercise in order to increase energy expenditure. But don't forget about the incredibly valuable NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is actually going to make up the biggest piece of energy expenditure, or potentially it could. We have individuals that are solely relying on exercise to make up their energy expenditure, and this is obviously not going to be as successful. If we have somebody who sits all day and then thinks working out for 45 minutes to an hour, 3 days a week is going to be enough to get them to where they need, they're going to have some issues there. So we want to remind them that, yes, the exercise is trying to speed things up a little bit, and there's a lot of other benefits from doing intended exercise, but we have to move more. And this is all of the things you've heard before, taking stairs versus escalators and elevators, and parking further away, and getting up and walking around your office, and whatever it might be. We just want to make sure that they're moving, because it can actually backfire when all you're relying on is exercise. There has been research showing that in some individuals, when we train really hard, they are so spent for the rest of the day, their total energy expenditure is actually less than than if they did not exercise that day. So we have to be careful. Are we working out so hard that we're putting our clients on the couch where they can't move for the rest of the day, and then they're super sore and they have a hard time getting around, so they just don't want to move, right? That's a backfire. That's going to actually take us further away from our goal, even though we're exercising. So keep that in mind. Like I said, we're going to focus on the exercise portion, but get your clients moving however they can. Now, within the exercise portion, we're going to focus primarily on cardio exercise. And obviously this can take on a whole number of different styles, and we're going to talk about that. But when we have somebody that approaches us and is asking about, what should I do to lose weight? And usually their answer in their head is, I need to eat less and I need to do more cardio. And that could be a possible solution, but not usually the way they think it is, right? They think, I need to starve myself and eat 500 calories a day, and I need to get on the treadmill for 3 hours a day, or whatever it is. So, obviously that's taking it to an extreme, but that's the thought process a lot of our clients are going through. So instead, we want to make sure we, again, educate them on what they need to do. So we've already talked about the nutrition side of it. Now let's talk about the exercise portion. So we're going to say cardio and conditioning, but know that strength and conditioning can blend together, and we can get a little bit of both from these. But we just want to differentiate the fact that, yeah, there's pure strength training where your primary goal is to build strength, and that serves a purpose. But if we're going to focus on enhancing energy expenditure and doing everything we can to maintain better weight management, I think this is where we're going to have the most value out of. So that's why we're going to focus on the future of cardio training, which is metabolic conditioning training. And all this really means is we're going to train the different metabolic systems with the body. So I do want to review energy production and how we create energy in the body and use it for exercise and other bodily functions. So this is essentially what we're trying to do, right? We want to be as efficient as possible at each of these three different energy systems. So understanding metabolic conditioning, it's going to be a combination of different styles of training, because different activity will go to different pathways to create that energy. So we want to make sure that we are using all three energy systems, and we're specifically programming exercise to target each of those different energy systems. There's a lot of benefit from this. It's going to help improve specific adaptations and efficiencies of the body, how we utilize fat and carbs for energy. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to speed up our metabolism, become more efficiently at using calories, at using the food we eat for that exercise that we're participating in. So I think I've kind of already mentioned the benefits, but yes, like I said, we're trying to improve efficiency. We want to make sure our body is really doing what it's supposed to be able to do. And unfortunately, the way people have trained and the lifestyles they've lived, and the nutrition practices they follow have really messed this part of up of their metabolism. So we're going to do everything we can to help restore some of those processes. You've probably heard of EPOC before. Not all exercise will enhance EPOC the same way. And even within metabolic training, certain styles of training will enhance it more. But again, we're going to just try and boost that metabolism, create as much energy expenditure as possible in order to create the highest total energy expenditure. We do get an increased anabolic response, again, with certain types of the training that we're going to do. When people get stuck in that long duration exercise, it can become very catabolic. Things are breaking down, including muscle tissue, even bone density, depending on the nutrition that's supporting that exercise. So we want to do everything possible to increase that anabolic response with exercise. Now, I know when people hear that term, they think anabolic steroids and building tons of muscle. And honestly, with many of the people we're working with, we're just trying to, if nothing else, maintain what they have while being in a caloric deficit, at least as much as possible, and maybe grow a little bit there. We want more balance in the program, and that's the key here, right? We're not just doing high intensity training. We're not just doing low intensity training. We're doing a little bit of everything to become as efficient as possible. Reducing boredom, I think, is a big one, right? You kind of get stuck in the same old routine, and yeah, if your primary form of exercise is getting on an elliptical for an hour, and that's all you do, unless you have a good book or a good movie you're watching, that can be incredibly boring. So we have great ways to reduce that and hopefully get them a little bit more excited about changing up their program a little bit. And obviously the whole goal is, let's get the fastest results we can, obviously as safely as we can. And I think this is a great method for doing so. So I want to talk, we've already talked about nutrition, but now let's start talking about the blend of, how that nutrition supports the activities that we're doing. Because a lot of times we get so caught up in eating less that we forget the foods we're eating play a crucial role in something like energy production. So here are our three main macronutrients. So we have our carbohydrates, our lipids, and our proteins. So just again, this is probably a review for many of you, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, we can see how each is broken down. So we have our carbohydrates is going, that's our breads and pastas and grains and all those things. We'll break those down into our glucose or potentially store them as glycogen. So that's our sugar. We have our lipids. Our lipids will be broken down into fatty acids. Actually, we have triglycerides, which are going to be glycerol and our fatty acids. And then finally, we have our proteins that are going to be broken down into amino acids. So amino acids will be the building block for things like muscle tissue. So looking at those fuel sources, a lot of times we hear that idea that, food is fuel. And I get what people are saying, but I've never been a fan of this analogy, because that would make it sound like, well, the more you eat, the more energy you would have. But, as we see in the picture here, how do you feel after like a Thanksgiving meal, or, after eating a lot of food? Shouldn't you just have a ton of energy if that was the case, right? And of course not. And it usually has the opposite effect, right? You eat so much, you just don't want to move, because now your body has to spend all that time trying to deal with that food, break it down, get rid of it, whatever it needs to do. Excess intake of any macronutrient, so whether it's fat, carbs, protein, it doesn't matter. You can only use so much of those things, and to excess of any of them is going to lead to increase in fat gain and fat stores within the body. It'll just be stored energy for later. So really, the fuel of the body is ATP, which we'll get into in a little bit, but we can use food, and really we use those macronutrients that we just talked about, our fats, our carbs, and protein, primarily our fats and our carbohydrates. We use those in the process of generating more ATP. So that's the fuel of the ATP. Food is just a way we can help generate more of that substance so we can create more energy. So our real goal is being as metabolically efficient as possible, right? Some people are going to eat food and they'll use some for energy, and a lot's going to get stored as fat. Other people are going to eat food and their body finds a way to use that energy the best way that it can use it. So that's what we mean by metabolic efficiency. So if you're not efficient, if you're not flexible with the food you're eating, you are more likely to store more fat as fuel. And the easiest example I can use here is, let's take a person who overwhelming majority of the foods they eat are carbohydrates. So they're just over consuming carbohydrates. Now, whatever macronutrient you eat the most of, you become the most efficient at it. So if I eat a lot of carbohydrates, I get really good at using carbohydrates for fuel. But there's a cost to that. You will become less efficient at using other sources of energy, so fat, protein. Same goes if you're following like a ketogenic diet, and tons of research will back this up, that if you eat a lot of fat, you utilize a lot of fat because it's what your body is used to getting, and learns how to break it down and use it better. So obviously this takes time, but when you consistently are eating a certain way, you tend to get really good at utilizing whatever it is available. If other things aren't as available, you don't become as efficient with those things. So if we go back to our example of the person that eats a lot of carbohydrates, if they stop eating carbohydrates, let's say I want to go on a diet, I'm going to start cutting carbohydrates out now, and no sugar, that's the popular thing to go to. What happens to that person, right? How awful are they going to feel over the next few days, few weeks, whatever it might be? The reason they feel so bad is because their body was so reliant on carbohydrates, they do not know how to get fuel from other sources very well. You could have, a lot of fat stores on your body, and if you're eating a very high carbohydrate diet, that well might be the case. So even though you have a great source of energy stored all over your body does not want to take it. It's waiting for you to get the next sugar intake, so it can use that for fuel. It's going to prefer to use that over anything else. So it's just going to wait, and it's going to make you feel terrible because your body just can't function the way that it needs to off of other fuel sources. Now, with time, that will get better and better. And this is why, some people, if they can kind of push through some of those feelings, it will get better. Cravings will go down, that brain fog and headaches and all the things we see when you cut out sugar will eventually go away. But we just have to realize that it's going to take time for that to happen. But all of these things, the body is incredibly adaptable. It changes, just like lifting weights. You lift weights, your body adapts, you get stronger, bigger muscles, and so on. So the same thing occurs with, the type of foods we're eating and things like that. So this is the name of the game. We want to make sure we improve metabolic efficiency. So if you eat fat, your body knows what to do with it. If you eat carbohydrates, your body knows what to do with it. And if you eat protein, your body knows what to do with it. So we want to make sure that, and this is, why I started in the beginning talking about what's more important, nutrition or exercise. We can't separate them because they work so closely together. The how we exercise to the how we eat will impact each other. So let's not separate them. Let's make sure we're focusing on the type of exercise that'll get us to use different fuel sources and becoming more efficient at using those fuel sources. So I mentioned I do teach exercise physiology. I promise I won't turn this into an exercise physiology class, but I do think we need to, again, be on the same page and understand energy production and how we're using these different things, just in case you haven't had as much experience looking at physiology. So the two main ways we produce ATP is going to be either through anaerobic energy production or aerobic. So anaerobic is going to be using glucose or glycogen without oxygen, or also using our ATP phosphocreatine system, which we'll talk about. But basically it's creating ATP without the presence of oxygen. And then our aerobic production will be using it could be further breaking down glucose using fat, amino acids, and other things with the presence of oxygen in order to produce more ATP. So, like I said, ATP is the chemical form of energy in the body. That's adenosine triphosphate. So it's adenosine with 3 phosphates attached to it. Some other terms we want to make sure we know. Creatine phosphate, we've probably seen creatine before. It's a very, very popular supplement. It is naturally occurring in the body. So we find it as creatine phosphate. We also have ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. So again, that's an adenosine with 2 phosphates. So in order to produce energy, we have our ATP molecule, and it's a very high energy chemical bond holding these molecules together. Now it takes energy to do this, but we can break that ATP apart, which will free a phosphate group. And when we break that phosphate group off, it releases energy, and that energy can be used for starting reactions, muscle contractions, things like that. Once we create that reaction, we'll have a phosphagen floating around, and it will bind with a creatine molecule, giving us creatine phosphate. And then we'll also have ADP, right? Because we took away a phosphate, so now we have that adenosine diphosphate. Well, we can take that creatine phosphate and combine that phosphate back on. Again, this takes energy, and we will have a new ATP molecule, and this is how we're going to recycle energy using the creatine phosphate system. So again, just basic energy production at the cellular level, but this is how we contract muscles. We have to get ATP, we have to break it apart, and just as importantly, we need to put it back together in order to create the next muscle contraction. Now, we'll get into more details, but we can use, so we have stored ATP in the body, right? So it's in the muscle, it's right there. We can use that immediately, right? If you just were to get up right now and start sprinting, you have ATP stored. Now, it will run out. So we need different ways to recycle that energy. And we mentioned, we have creatine phosphate and we have ADP. We can use energy to put those together in order to break it back apart and release more energy. So we can fuel that whole process through different substrates like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So I know fat's the popular one, so we'll talk about fat first. So it's one of our macronutrients along with carbohydrates and proteins. They're all carbon-based compounds. Fat, which I mentioned, is made up of glycerol and fatty acids. And put this all together, we have our triglycerides. So we break those triglycerides apart to get glycerol and our free fatty acids. So we need the free fatty acids in order to utilize fat and break it down. Now, I've already mentioned an excess of any of the 3 macronutrients will lead to fat gain. So I know, and this is just a popular belief for many, is that you consume too much fat and you get fat. And yes, that is true, right? But it's not just fat. It could be carbohydrates, it could be protein. They all have a limited need in the body. And once we hit that limit, we have to do something with it. Some can be converted into other things. Some we can just pass. And then some we're just going to take and store as fat. So, every body will go through these different processes a little bit differently. But essentially, this is something we're all dealing with. The term beta oxidation is referring to converting fatty acids into acetyl coenzyme A. We'll look at this a little bit more detailed, but with aerobic energy production, we have to go through something called the Krebs cycle. The first stop in the Krebs cycle is we need acetyl coenzyme A. This is where we start in the mitochondria. So until we get that, we can't start our aerobic metabolism. So we can turn glucose eventually. We can get acetyl coenzyme A, and we can take fatty acids, break those down, oxidize them into acetyl coenzyme A. So that's referred to as beta oxidation. And then we break fat down, and it will release carbon atoms, water. We get carbon dioxide, water, as well as a few other things, in addition to the energy it produces as we break it down. I know a common question that we might hear is, so where does the fat go? It goes in a couple places. So some, we mentioned, it's getting broken down into different things. So some of the fat is going to be released in the form of energy. Some will be released as water, and we may excrete it as sweat. So you do sweat out some of your fat, sort of. We talked about acetyl coenzyme A, so the carbon atoms that are broken off to assemble acetyl coenzyme A are used to assemble carbon dioxide, or CO2, which is then pushed into the bloodstream, taken to the lungs, and then we breathe it out. So I guess, technically you can say you sweat out the fat, you breathe out the fat, but it's obviously a little bit more complex than that. So I want to make sure we understand the three energy systems and kind of where energy is coming from. So I've already talked about the first system. So that's the phosphocreatine, or ATP PCR system. That is what we use for, and we'll talk about more of these in more detail, but that's what we use for very fast, explosive work. It only is going to last for a few seconds. So we have stored ATP, and we have phosphocreatine in the muscle tissue as well, so we can recycle ATP with ADP very quickly. But there's a high cost to that, and we can't do it for very long. If we're going to exercise for longer than just a few seconds, we need support from somewhere else. That's going to be through glycolysis, which would be our next system. So now we're breaking down glucose or glycogen in order to get ATP. So again, this step is going to be anaerobic. We don't need oxygen present. We can do it very quickly. We can produce very high intense effort with this energy system. But again, there's a high cost to it, and we won't be able to sustain it for more than a few minutes when we solely rely on this energy system. So if I want to exercise more than a couple minutes, now I have to get into our aerobic energy system, which is the oxidative system. And that's, we see both systems on this slide, and I'll kind of walk through what exactly we're looking at here. But that final step is, now we have oxygen is present. We can further break down glucose, or now we can involve amino acids or fatty acids to release more energy. So this energy system, it does take the longest to support energy metabolism. So it takes a little while for it to kick in and really contribute, but it produces the most amount of energy that will last hours and hours long. Now, you won't be able to put out as high of energy effort or intensity with this energy system compared to the other ones, but it can sustain exercise for much longer there. So those are essentially our three energy systems. So you don't see the first one on this slide. That was the one for our short duration, high intense exercise, recycling ATP with phosphocreatine. Our next step, like I said, is glycolysis. So we see on the top here, we have a glucose molecule. We'll break down that glucose molecule to release energy. As we break down that glucose molecule, we're going to be left with pyruvate. Now, pyruvate, a few things can happen at this step. If oxygen is not present, we can't continue on this path yet, right? We can't go in to the mitochondria. We can't produce energy aerobically. We have to, again, primarily rely on anaerobic energy production. So pyruvate will be converted to lactate, or lactic acid. And that can be used as a form of energy. It can be pushed back into the bloodstream, and that lactate can be taken up by the liver, go through something called the Cori cycle, and actually produce more glucose. And then the liver can spit out that glucose into the bloodstream. It can go back to the muscle. The muscle can take in that glucose, break it down, then it gets pyruvate again. If oxygen's still not present, it's going to be converted to lactate, and this cycle will continue with anaerobic energy production. Now it gets to a point where you're not going to be able to handle all of this increase in lactate. And that's when we get to our lactate threshold, where all of a sudden lactate's piling up much quicker than we are getting rid of it. And that is an intensity known as our lactate threshold. And we're not going to be able to maintain that intensity for too much longer. All right, that's kind of our peak anaerobic capacity there. So we have to rely more and more on aerobic energy production, which means we're going to have to drop that intensity a little bit more if we want to sustain our exercise effort. Okay, so let's say we are still exercising and now oxygen is present. So now we can further break down that glucose molecule or bring in other substrates in order to create energy aerobically in the mitochondria. And that's where we see this Krebs cycle, this big circle here. This is occurring in the mitochondria. So now that oxygen's present, we can shuttle that pyruvate over to the mitochondria where it's going to be converted into acetyl coenzyme A. Once we have acetyl coenzyme A, we're not going to go through all the different steps here, but this is the Krebs cycle. It's going to be broken down and converted into other molecules, releasing energy, releasing hydrogen, carbon dioxide, all the things that we previously talked about. Hydrogen ions are going to be shuttled into the electron transport chain, and we're further going to break these down and release more energy. So it's a much more complex, a longer process, but we do get a lot more energy production from it. Some of these other things you see on here are just how other things contribute. So we see a lot of amino acids all over here. Alanine, isoleucine, leucine, all the different amino acids are kind of spread out because we can use those, and we can either use them to generate more pyruvate. Isoleucine we can convert to acetyl coenzyme A. Some we can convert into acetoacetate, that's essentially where our fatty acids are going to come into play. You may have heard of ketones and ketone bodies, so breaking down fat into a usable form. This is what we see right here with our ketone bodies entering the Krebs cycle in the form of acetyl coenzyme A as well. So there's a lot of places we can use these different fuel sources, but essentially it's all doing the same thing, producing energy aerobically once we get it into the Krebs cycle. So I know this is very complex, and if you haven't seen something like this before, it just looks like some crazy words written on the slide here, but I at least want you to understand our different steps in the energy production cycles, from our fast to our medium to our slow and longer duration exercise. Now, it's important to remember with all of these, no one system is working 100%. Right? So you're not just producing energy aerobically or anaerobically, it's going to be a blend. So as we talk, we're really just saying we're trying to emphasize one system over the other. We're trying to do, more work in using glycolysis, right? So we're stressing that system the most, but keep in mind, all of the systems are going to be active and helping just to a lesser degree. Okay, so again, I already mentioned the different systems, but just as a quick review, I do want to make sure we repeat so you're clear where each of these systems plays a role, because now if we know when the system is ideally used, we can design exercise programs to reflect that specific system. So with our phosphagen or creatine phosphagen system, we know we have stored ATP and phosphocreatine in the muscle. We can use that stored energy for very high intense exercise. So lifting weights, sprints, jumping, things like that. So it's going to be any high intensity effort that's going to last 10 seconds or less, just to give you a general guideline. Limitations, basically, like I said, you're going to run out of those stored energy supplies, and the phosphagen system can only replace them so quickly, right? It takes a few minutes to, it takes a few seconds to deplete your ATP stores. It takes a few minutes to regenerate them. So you can start to see what our training might look like. Very short duration, high intensity work with longer recovery periods in between to allow for complete regeneration. Okay, and then going on to our next system, glycolysis, or the glycogen system. So here, like I said, we're taking glucose and glycogen and we're breaking them down to release energy. Our intensities are going to be pretty high, so roughly 85% of our max heart rate, just again to give you a general idea, but essentially it's high intense effort that you'd be able to maintain for 1 to 3 minutes until you fatigue. Our limitations here, there's a few limitations that we'll run into, but we are running out of glycogen store. Metabolic byproducts are building up. Remember I mentioned lactic acid, things like that. So a few things that can interfere with activity are starting to build up here. And this one often we don't talk about it a whole lot, but there's the psychological component as well, where our brain is going to limit how hard we push ourselves. And in some research is showing that our brain stops us from hitting real limitations well before our physiology does. So that's always an interesting concept to think about. And then, as I mentioned, our byproduct is lactic acid. Remember, it's not a waste product. Some people refer to lactic acid as a waste product. It is something we continue to use. It just gets to a point where it starts to build up and cause problems if there's too much of it there. And then finally, we have our aerobic or oxidative system. So now we're using glucose, glycogen, fat. We could use amino acids. We can use other things as well for energy production. But this is our aerobic system. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing more low to moderate exercise using this system primarily. So now we're looking at basically anything longer than a few minutes is going to be stressing this system here. Our limitation, we can run out of glycogen, so we use glycogen and glucose for aerobic energy production as well. So if you're running low on sugar stores, it will influence this system. Hopefully, as we talked about, if you're metabolically flexible, you can make up for it with increased fat utilization, but it comes to a point when glycogen stores are depleted, your body has some regulations set up where it's going to shut you down if you are running too low on energy. And then our byproducts, carbon dioxide. So obviously we're going to be breathing heavy, just as we oxidize all of these different molecules. Water is a byproduct as well. So let's talk about now the practical side and actually implementing this type of training. So it just depends, and I know that's always a vague answer to give, but you have to understand what can your client handle. Now, metabolic training by definition, it isn't always high intensity, but there are high intensity efforts in there, and there can be very high intensity efforts in there. So we have to realize that it's not for everyone. They have to work up to the complete spectrum of training that we'd like to incorporate. But we know a little bit will go a long way. So little sneaking in of high intensity intervals into a regular routine is going to be great. There's nothing that says an entire workout has to be high intensity, right? Especially if I'm just introducing it. I can do, kind of a traditional training session, and metabolic finishers are really popular where maybe we just end with 3 to 5 minutes of some higher intensity work, right? So we just kind of start to expose them, end of the workout, and then they're finished after that. So there's lots of different ways we can implement it, but just keep that in mind. We can sneak it in. It doesn't have to be the whole program or the whole workout. We have to understand rest and recovery, and that goes in between intervals. If I'm doing interval training and allowing for maximum or ideal recovery, depending on what system I'm trying to be using, as well as recovering between workouts. The problem that many people run into, we kind of see both ends of the spectrum, where we have those that never train at high intensities. Like I mentioned, they're always stuck in that long duration, low intensity cardio exercise. And we have others that are trying to just crush every workout and do high intensity all the time. And neither of those are optimal. It's not more is better. It's doing the right thing when you need it is better. So the magic happens in between workouts, right? We expose the body to high intensity efforts. It causes all of these disruptions within the body. The body adapts, it gets better, it gets stronger, and it's going to better handle that workout the next time, the more I expose it to it. But if that's all I'm doing, and I'm doing it often, my body never gets complete recovery to get back to where it was before that first workout. So you're basically always limping into the next workout. You're always trying to catch up. But if we don't have that recovery, then we really can't see the progress that we're looking for, because we're never truly recovered. Consider cutting the duration of the workout. So I know this can be a tough one, but just realize there's nothing magical about an hour workout. That might be the time you have with a client, but we want to keep that in mind, that if I have an hour with them, do I want to do high intensity training for an hour, right? Probably not. Like, most people aren't going to be able to handle something like that. So understand that there has to be other things to fill in the workout, or is it something they do on their own? And hey, this is only a 15-minute workout or a 20-minute workout. If you do it the right way, that's all you need, right? If somebody says they were doing high intensity intervals for an hour and a half, I have to look and see what their definition of high intensity is, because it's probably a little bit different than mine. Those are training sessions that just won't be able to last that long. And kind of at a minimum is this whole high-low training. If you're just not sure where to start, this is probably a safe bet, where we just have to make sure we at least separate every high-intensity workout with a low-intensity workout. So it could be, hey, I'm doing interval training on Monday. We do a low intensity workout on Tuesday. Wednesday they take a day off. Thursday's back to high intensity. So we can spread it out that way. So it's just this idea of, are you at least hitting different ends of the spectrum, or am I just trying to kill it every single workout and push my clients every single workout, right? So have a way that we can sneak in low intensity sometime. And again, it doesn't always have to be with you. Some of these are really simple, like, hey, I want you to put on a heart rate monitor, and I want you to go for a walk or a jog, and I want your heart rate to stay between 130 and 140 beats per minute, right? So it's pretty low, and it's not going to be super intense, but this is actually going to help boost the recovery rate and help you in the long run. So just finding ways to incorporate those different types of training methods. Okay, so now let's start to touch on some of the specifics with putting together all these different pieces. So I do think it's a good idea to understand heart rate zones. Heart rate monitors are just, they're so cheap now. Everybody can use them. It's a very accessible technology. You don't have to use them. It just makes everything much, much easier when you can prescribe a specific heart rate for a workout. Now, you can use these for different things. This can be for like strength training and that type of metabolic conditioning, or it could be for more traditional cardio. So just again, keep in mind, there's so many different ways to implement these different workouts. But we need to understand that at certain intensities, we use different fuel sources. We use different energy systems, right? So we already have talked about high intensity effort. We start with that phosphagen system, then we move into that glycogen or glycolysis, and then at low intensity, we're primarily using our aerobic or oxidative system. We also know that typically at high intensity effort, we're primarily using carbohydrates for our fuel source. At low intensity efforts, we're primarily using fat. And this is why it's so important to mix up those different training sessions, right? To understand the different training zones, because you can help teach the body, or re-educate it, it always knew how to do it, how to use those different fuel sources by exposing the body to these different training stimulus. So if I know certain physiological markers, we can get very custom heart rate zones. And yes, you can get very complex with this, but I think we can keep this very simple. And um, we'll come back to the heart rate training zone. I want to make sure I at least touch on these other things a little bit, but I'll show you specifically how to set up those zones. Because it bleeds right into considering what energy system is used. So when you understand what heart rate training is doing and what energy system is being used, we can now be very specific with our training program. I mentioned recovery, so understanding, well, how long should you rest between workouts? Should we use time? Should we use heart rate? Obviously it depends. If you have a heart rate monitor, you can use heart rate. If you don't, you might be more stuck to timed rest or feel. But again, we can get much more custom if we have specific heart rates that we're shooting for. And then, like I mentioned, understanding how long should we recover between intense sessions. And then obviously understanding proper progressions and exercise selection. If we're doing very high intense effort, I don't want to pick an exercise they've never done before or something that they haven't perfected. I want to make sure that we stick to the things they already do very well, because we know when people fatigue, it's going to get much more harder to maintain that form. Okay, so let's go back to touching on the training zones. So ventilatory threshold testing is an easy way with very low tech that you can determine specific zones. You can get metabolic testing and figure out what your aerobic capacity is, your anaerobic capacity, your lactate threshold, your heart rate, at all these different things, and you'll have very clear-cut ways to see, hey, when do you start using more fat, when do you start using more carbohydrates, things like that, and then you can design your program based off of that. If you don't have access to that, you can do a simple ventilatory threshold test. So it's a graded exercise test that you would do with somebody. Typically you're doing if I'm going to stick to more traditional cardio like running or biking or something like that, I'm going to pick the mode of exercise that they most commonly do. So I personally work with a lot of runners, so we'll do this on a treadmill, for example. So we, after a warm-up, get their heart rate to about 120 beats per minute, and then we start the test. At every minute, we increase the intensity, which could be incline, it could be speed, it could be resistance, depending on what you're using. And we just do the talk test. So you can have them sing happy birthday or the alphabet or, read a paragraph or, a few sentences. And we just pay attention to what's going on with their breathing. When we get to the point, and we do this every minute, we track heart rate, we track their speech, their speaking. The point at which breathing rate significantly increases. So now all of a sudden when they sing happy birthday, you notice them breathing a little bit more than they were previously. We are now getting to that, or we have hit that ventilatory threshold number 1. So this basically it's saying this is the first significant change in your breathing is occurring at this point. And if we go back to all the things that we talked about, we can see why. So we know that as exercise intensity increases, we are starting to use less fat for fuel, more carbohydrate. So remember, we're using more and more carbohydrate. As we break down carbohydrate, we get pyruvate. Pyruvate, could go into the mitochondria and be used as to use for aerobic energy production. But we're also going to have it convert to lactate. Lactate goes into the bloodstream, and we convert that to glucose. And but as I mentioned, it gets to a point where lactate levels get more and more. When we break lactate down, a byproduct will be carbon dioxide, and we're going to have to get that carbon dioxide out, which means we have to start breathing more and more. So research has shown that these numbers are to be pretty accurate. So this is the point, that first change in breathing, where now we're hitting the crossover point, right? Where now we're switching from primarily using fats to primarily using carbohydrates, and we're seeing lactate levels start to increase a little bit. Now, when we hit this first disruption in breathing, we're going to mark their heart rate down. That's going to be our VT1 heart rate. We're going to continue the test. Every minute we get harder and harder and harder, and then we're going to get to a point in which breathing becomes very difficult and hard to speak. right? So you ask them to sing happy birthday. You say, was that difficult to do? Any answer other than, or if they say it was difficult, anything other than no, that was not difficult, we consider you're saying it's difficult. We would mark that down. Now we're at VT2. So this has been associated with our lactate threshold, to that point where we are now producing more and more lactate and can't handle the increased workload. So we mark this heart rate down, and that will be our VT2 heart rate. So now we have two heart rates, our VT1, VT2, and let's just say for our purposes, VT1 was 140 beats per minute and VT2 was 165 beats per minute. Now we can construct customized training zones for this person. So zone 1 would be considered anything below VT1. Zone 2 would be anything between VT1 and VT2, and then zone 3 would be anything above VT2. So easy way to say this is we have our low intensity training zone, our moderate intensity training zone, and our high intensity training zone. And now we can start to hit those different energy systems with very specific numbers. So now I know, hey, if your VT1 is 140 beats per minute and I want you primarily aerobic, by definition, I need to make sure you're staying at or a little bit below that number. So if I tell you we need to do some aerobic training and you get on the treadmill and get your heart rate at 155 beats per minute and go, I know you're in that moderate zone. So we're actually not developing the aerobic system like I wanted to, right? Remember, zone 1, you're primarily using fat for fuel. We're becoming more fat efficient. So I want to make sure that we are keeping that heart rate appropriate so we can hit the specific energy system that we're trying to go for here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, heart rate training can get very complex, so I just wanted to keep it simple to at least get you started and get you thinking, hey, there is a point for doing low intensity, there is a point for doing high intensity. Some people, we see the benefits of high intensity training and they want to throw away everything else, but know that we need a blend of all of these different things. Okay, so I want to give you some practical things that we can pay attention to. So if we want to challenge the aerobic system, what are some things we need to consider? So we already know the fuel sources, we're using our fatty acids, and we're using glucose and glycogen as well. I know my work duration needs to be a few minutes if I really want to stress this system. If I'm doing like minute or 45-second sprints, it's not really challenging this system as much because I'm going to hit intensities that are too high. Right? Think about it. If I said I need you to run for 5 minutes versus 30 seconds, what's your pace going to look like? Right? So obviously there's going to be different intensities there. So work duration is going to be a few minutes long. Our recovery duration, we typically are going to see like a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. But as they get more advanced, we might see like a 0.5-to-1 rest to work ratio. So for example, if a 1-to-1 would be you're going to run hard for 3 minutes and then you're going to walk for 3 minutes and then run hard for 3 minutes, something like that. Or if I'm at 0.5, I might be saying, okay, you're going to run hard for 3 minutes, you're going to walk for 90 seconds and repeat. So typically we'll see an active recovery there. The intensity, you're looking at your zone 1 and maybe low zone 2, so you might slightly be going over that VT2, but not by much. Our volume, these are just general, so we might do like 3 to 6 repetitions, 1 to 2 sets. It really depends on what the specific goals are, so it's kind of hard to give recommendations there. So it could be a traditional example. You're going to get on the treadmill, run at this mile per hour because I know it's going to get you in the right heart rate, and then you're going to walk at this miles per hour if we're going to do it as interval based. Or know that we could do just a long aerobic run or whatever, right? It could be 45 minutes, just keep your heart rate at this number or below, and you're good to go. All right, and again, just kind of reiterating. So make sure if you are doing intervals, the work periods are longer than a few minutes. We're not going at too high of intensity here, so we're intentionally trying to keep the heart rates lower, paying attention to recovery. If you notice, just because as a side note, if you track their resting heart rate and you notice it's over 60 beats per minute, that's a sign that the cardiovascular system's working harder than it needs to. And this is probably where you're going to spend most of your time right now. Your goal is just to get that cardiorespiratory systems working better. And I think this is probably the best way to do it for that person. So that doesn't mean you can't do any other type of training. It's just saying that I would say this is probably the priority. We're going to try and help get the heart more efficient, bring that resting heart rate down more, so they can better handle more stress on the system. Some examples, so our low, long distance training, so just going out on a run, keeping the intensity low. Cardiac output workouts, so these can be like circuit-based training, but not super high intensity, just trying to maintain a heart rate of, again, you have an idea of what their heart rate should be and just maintaining that, or doing intervals, aerobic intervals, so longer work periods with a recovery, again, not super high intensity though. Okay, so I have an example here for you of a cardiac output circuit. So you'll see I just have a few different exercises I put together. I'm trying to keep an eye on my heart rate, which you're going to see my heart rate monitor going at the same time, and just keeping it within a range. So I'm trying to go between like 130 to 140-ish beats per minute. You'll see I do go a little too in high intensity in some point, but then I just know I need to back off and slow down. So obviously you need a heart rate monitor in order to do this, but we're just trying to keep that intensity at an aerobic intensity. And I would just keep this circuit going for like 30 minutes. So it's not necessarily intervals, but I might take rests as I need them. So you can kind of see what this will look like. So I'm starting with some med ball slams, and you can plug and play whatever exercises make sense for you. So what I do is I just keep going. You're going to see my heart rate goes up as it starts getting closer to that 150 mark. I start to slow down, and then I pair an exercise where I'm still moving, but I'm trying to pick an exercise that maybe will help me get my heart rate down a little bit better, and that I put a farmer's carry in there. So you can see my heart starting to level off at 153. And again, these numbers aren't magical. We're just trying to hit close to these. All right, so now my heart rate's coming back down again. And then I'm going to move on to another exercise. I might kind of walk around a little bit, make sure my heart rate's coming down sufficiently. And then I'm just going to do some battle rope waves. And just, again, nothing magical about these exercises, but you can see I kind of do a little bit more intense exercise and then kind of back it off with something a little bit easier, maybe something that I have to focus or pay attention to. And as that heart rate starts to creep up, I back off. So I'm not doing timed, I'm not doing reps, I'm just keeping an eye on my heart rate as I go, right? And sometimes heart rate, you'll see there's a delayed response. So my heart rate was still going up a little bit as I got on the balance beam, because it was still working off of the battling rope exercise. Now I'm just gonna, now that I'm a little bit out of breath and winded, I'm gonna focus on my balance, and you can see my heart rate starting to drop again. And then I'm gonna move to another exercise. So we're just gonna have some sliders here, and we're gonna do some mountain climbers. So you can see my heart rate's getting a little bit closer to that 130. So I wanna pick up that pace a little bit here, get my heart rate up. And yes, there is going to be a little trial and an effort with some of these exercises. So you're going to see like sometimes all of a sudden the heart rate jumped way up. And even though I stopped, it's still going up. So it's okay. Just walk around, take a breather, grab a sip of water, whatever you need to do. All right, so you can see all of a sudden my heart rate kind of spiked there after those mountain climbers. Right, and then I went into a tall kneeling halo. And just trying to breathe and get that heart rate to drop back down. And it kind of lingered here a little bit. And this weight was a little heavy, so I could see my heart rate wasn't going down, so I actually stopped after a few reps. And then I picked an exercise where I knew I can definitely control my heart rate and breathe And so just went in right into a single leg reach. The more you can focus on your breath as you go, the easier it is to control that heart rate. So it's a cool drill to just help people become more aware of what their heart's doing and how they absolutely have control over their heart rate. And the more they do these types of workouts, the more they see, hey, if I really focus on breathing, if I slow down or if I speed up or whatever it is, we have much better control of our heart rate, and we might be able to get more work in at a lower heart rate, which is great. That's the idea behind all of this. It means we're becoming more efficient. All right, so that was just an example, and I would basically just continue that for about 30 minutes or so, and it definitely could be longer. Okay, moving into our next system, so our glycolysis. So again, recap, we're breaking down glucose and sugar. We're going about 15 seconds to 3 minutes. We're going to have an active recovery, 1 to 3 work to rest ratio. Now you can see we're hitting higher training volume intensities. So we're hitting higher end of zone 2, maybe a low end of zone 3, kind of hitting that lactate threshold number. And again, just some rough numbers, 4 to 6 repetitions of 2 to 4 sets, just depending on what I might be doing. All right, and again, our time, how long we're going to go for, our training zones, high intensity. The goal is to increase lactic acid and hydrogen ion tolerance and improve clearance of byproducts. So we have to kind of hit these intensities to build up these byproducts and get better at handling what to do with them. We do want some rest, so we're going to see like a 1 to 3 work to rest ratio. So maybe I go for a minute and I rest for 3. Or in somebody more advanced, maybe I'm going to go for a minute and rest for 30 seconds. So it just kind of depends on where you're at. You'll have to play around with this a little bit. But we just want to make sure that we're not having full recovery, because we do want to improve that lactic acid tolerance. So we recover, but not to complete rest. All right, so a couple examples. So we have some threshold intervals. So these are high intensity bursts where we'd hit intensities at or slightly above our lactic threshold. We're going to hold it there for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we're going to recover for about 3 to 5 minutes. So about a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. And we are going to repeat that 2 to 5 times. All these numbers I'm giving you absolutely depend on the person. Some people, they're not going to be able to maintain their lactic threshold for this long. Other people, it's not going to be that big a deal. So you just have to know who you're working with. So again, we're just exposing our body to being at that lactic threshold so it can learn how to handle it better. We might do lactic intervals. So these are more max intensity. So we're hitting like 30 seconds to a minute of the hardest intensity we can maintain. We are going to take a pretty long recovery here, about 3 to 5 minutes. And repeat this for about 5 to 10 reps. And then we might throw complexes in there, which we have some examples of those. So a complex, we've done total workshops just on complexes, but just think of it, it's circuit training using the same piece of equipment, the same weight. The idea is you're not putting that weight down. We're going to do a whole bunch of exercises back to back without rest once we finish all the exercises that will repeat. So we pick about 3 to 5 exercises. We use the same tool for the entire circuit. You're going to go as hard as you can, and your set should last about 30 to 180 seconds, somewhere in that range there. So again, you're going to see my heart rate here, so you'll see what it looks like to go through this and with the exercises that I'm doing. So I'm going to start with a wall ball exercise, so just a squat toss. This one I did prescribe reps, and I'm blanking exactly. You can count along with how many reps I'm actually doing. But we're going to do the same number of reps for each exercise. Then I'm going to turn and go right into a shuffle throw. Again, I'm trying to go as hard as I can with each of these different movements. Med balls are great because we can do high intensity work. Throwing a med ball, having a wall works great. And then I'm going right to the other side, shuffle throw. So I know this doesn't look like conditioning or cardio, but if you take a peek at what my heart rate's doing, it's starting to climb up there pretty high, right? So we're hitting 160s now, which is getting pretty high intensity as I go. Okay, then I'm going to go right into a side-to-side slam. Again, you see my heart rate's just creeping up. So this is basically like a really long interval, just using, not necessarily strength, but it could be strength exercises in order to do this. So these are great if you have those clients that they don't like running, they hate doing things like that. So we just throw a bunch of exercises like this at them, and then we let them recover. So now you won't see the whole rest, but we got my heart rate to peak around 163, 164, and then we're going to allow me some recovery time, 30 seconds. Well, again, I didn't time how long that would be, but you could do, a great place to start is like that 1-to-1 ratio. So if that took me a minute to get through, I'm going to allow a minute recovery, and then we're going to do it again, and we might do that 4 to 6 rounds. And if you watch my heart rate monitor throughout the whole workout, it's going to look like an interval workout where you're going to see it pop up and then come back down. Here's an example of a kettlebell complex, just to give you some more idea. I don't have the heart rate monitor, but we can just see what's going on. So we're going to go kettlebell swings. So a double arm swing. Again, you're going to see reps vary with each of the different types of complexes. But so we have 10 swings. Then we're going to go right into a goblet loaded reverse lunge. And we'll do 10 lunges. Again, we're trying not to take any rest in between exercises. So it's one right to the next. And then we'll go right into overhead press. And if I was wearing a heart rate monitor, so I'm doing more strength-based exercises, but you're going to see my heart rate just climb as we get through the circuit. And then same idea, now we rest, recover, and start over with the next interval. Sandbags are also great tools. So we have kettlebells are great because one exercise just flows right into the next so easily. Sandbags work the same way. So again, I'm just trying to give you some more ideas with different ways you can implement. And these are kind of my go-to tools with sandbags and kettlebells, just because it's so easy to put these complexes together. So here we're going push-ups right into a lateral lunge with a high pull. And if you haven't seen our complex webinar, I would check that out. It'll give you much more detail on how to put together these different complexes and reps and weights and things like that to consider. But here you can at least see what we're talking about. So we're going to go right into our front squat, and then we'll finish it off with our rotational overhead press. So the nice thing about these is the fact that we're combining strength and cardio and conditioning all at the same time. That's, a fairly heavy weight, so I am getting some strength work, but I'm definitely getting my heart rate up. Now I recover, and then I can repeat for a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth round, whatever I'm trying to accomplish. More complexes. So another way you can do it, and on the previous examples, we were looking primarily at the exercises to be completed before you move on to the next one. We can also do a complex where you do 1 rep of each exercise and then cycle through that way, and that's what we're going to see here. So we're going to do a clean, a lunge, right to a snatch, to a squat, right? So that was 1 rep. Now I start over. Clean, lunge, snatch, and squat, right? So instead of doing, let's just say 4 reps of the clean, 4 reps of the lunge, here we're just mixing it up a little bit, and we're going to do 1 rep of each and then go through it 4 to 6 times. So just again, they're both great ways to implement complexes, just a little bit different. This one's going to be a little bit more complex because you have to think about so many different things, but it's a great way to get that brain active when you have to think about what's the next step in the complex there. And again, same thing, but now looking at sandbag complex. So we're going to do a rotational lunge. each side, bent over row, clean, squat, press. So that's 1 rep. Then we go rotational lunge, bent over row, right to a clean, squat, press, right? So again, I'm showing the sandbag and the kettlebell, but just picture whatever tool, you like to use, med balls, dumbbells, you can do these with body weight, and just how can you put a circuit together where there's no rest between exercises, they kind of flow right into each other. You can use the same weight for all of them, and it still is a challenge. So that's always something to pay attention to make sure it's a good resistance for all of these different movements here. With the ultimate goal at the end is, again, think it's like an interval. We're trying to get that heart rate up, then we recover and repeat. Okay, and then our final system, our phosphagen. So again, we're using that stored ATP. We're hitting very short durations, less than 15 seconds, longer recoveries. So remember, it might take a few minutes to completely restore the phosphagen system. If you're doing more if you're not doing enough recovery, you're going to see intensity can't be maintained, and we're going to be training more in that glycolysis system or glycolytic system. So you have to make sure there's adequate recovery. The easiest way to determine that is, hey, if I know your intensity is supposed to be all out, does every work period look pretty much the same with whatever you might be doing? If I notice that it's getting slower or weaker or whatever it is, there might not be enough recovery built in. So pay attention to that there. All right, again, keep it short duration. Try not to get too much of the glycolytic system involved. We're hitting very high intensities, so definitely in zone 3 here. And like I said, allow for that full recovery. That's going to depend on the person, on how long they actually need to recover. Because these are so intense, and it's not just the muscles that are working, the nervous system is going to be tested here too. We do want to make sure there's adequate recovery, and it's a lot of strain on the muscles and the tendons and the joints. So we don't want to hit maximal intensity all the time. We just expose them to this maybe once or twice a week. All right, so our alactic intervals, so again, very short duration, highest intensity while maintaining technique. Use things that they can practice with and maintain that good intensity. So I don't believe I have videos for any of these, but these are great examples here, like sled pushes. Assault bikes or airdyne bikes are great for like these all-out efforts. Battling ropes, very low impact, exercises are going to be ideal choices. So we sprint and then we recover, and then we sprint, and we might do like 10 to 20 sets of these exercises, and maybe we bounce around, right? Maybe you're on the assault bike, 10-second all-out sprint, and then you do a nice slow walk over to the battling ropes, 10-second all-out sprint, and then it's like a minute walk back, and we do that for 20 rounds. Like that's a pretty awesome workout that we could be doing there. So one of many ways we can implement this type of training. Shuttle runs are going to be great too. And now, depending on the type of shuttle run you're doing, you can involve all different energy systems there. So just keep that in mind. Like, am I doing very short shuttle runs or longer? But I like to bring up this study, basically looking at running with turning. So a lot of times when we look at running and energy expenditure, it's just like, okay, you ran for an hour at this speed. How much energy did you expend? But when we look at turning, what that actually does to our energy cost, because it's not efficient, right? If you have to speed up, slow down, turn around, speed back up again, all of that takes energy. So this is from a study. We can see the angle of the turn and the energy expenditure related to that. So, no turning at that 0 degree, right? So that was kind of the baseline there. If I have to turn 45 degrees, and these and the numbers you see there are at different speeds that they were going. A 45 degree turn, a 90 degree turn, and then when you look at that 180 degree turn, how dramatic that energy expenditure line goes up there. So just showing shuttle runs are great, where I run to a cone and I turn around and run back and forth. These are great ways to throw in intervals as well. And here are just a few examples, right? So I run from point A to point B. So that first example, we can do a 45-degree turn. So we see like a figure 8 hexagon drill here, a box drill. So we have our 90-degree, and then 5-meter shuttle, with our 180 turn. So there's a lot of different ways we can implement it. But according to that research that we showed on the last slide, that 180-degree turn is probably going to be the most beneficial if we're specifically looking at energy expenditure. It's just going to cost more energy to have to stop and turn around and speed up again. All right. Well, we made it, guys. I hope, I know I threw a lot of information at you. I hope it all makes sense, but just keep in mind that there are so many different ways that we can teach our clients proper weight management, and how it will involve nutrition, it will involve exercise, has to involve both, right? So, you have your own experiences, but remember there are other experiences out there, and some will do well with it, some won't. So this is why we want to be as educated as possible and know the best options for each client, whether it's in terms of nutrition or exercise. But I think what we're trying to do, and my goal of this workshop was to make sure you have options, right? You have different ways you can teach your clients to change their dietary habits and to change their exercise habits, right? So there's so many different ways we can do this. What we talked about today really just scratches the surface. It is not everything you can be doing out there. It was really just to get you thinking about the things maybe you're not thinking about right now, and might have to look a little bit deeper into, so you can provide more information for your clients. All right. Well, now that we've viewed the complete webinar, you'll be able to log on to our website. Remember to click on the administration tab on the top, click on webinar on demand. Today's webinar was Beyond Cardio, Sweat Equity, and Weight Management webinar. Remember to select that exact title, because you have that 20-question quiz, and we want to make sure you're getting the right quiz for the right workshop. You'll fill out the brief evaluation once you're done with the quiz, and then you'll be able to get your certificate instantly, and it'll be emailed to you. And again, don't forget that webinar quiz is going to be based on the printed material that you received, and it will follow along specifically in that order, not necessarily in the way I presented it. So if you have that handout handy, it will make the webinar go, or the quiz go much easier. Well, that's going to do it. As always, thank you so much for choosing Exercise Etc. Again, my name is Mike Diebler, and I really hope you found some good value in this webinar and have a few ideas on how you can implement it with your clients right away. But hopefully we'll see you again at another webinar or at one of our live workshops.